I'm Eva Oh, and this is the Teakink podcast. I've been a Dominatrix since 2011, and I would like to spill the tea on my life. Thank you for listening.
Money. This is the third episode in my little mini-series on power, what I've learned about it as a dominatrix. And money. I think in and of itself, it represents the definition of power, right? If power is ability, when you have access to wealth, it can enable many a thing. Where to begin? When I first started working as a dominatrix, what was my relationship to money at that point in time? I think I was just looking to be able to have basic needs met. When I entered this job, it wasn't really about accruing wealth or anything like this. It was literally just about being able to exist. And I think that I haven't really been very strategic in terms of my learnings around it over time. It's just been me being open, perhaps, to information and a lot of information coming my way. Also, when I first started working, Findom was not a category, really. It was maybe an aspect of how people would run relationships, but it wasn't a popular search term in 2010, 2011. I'd say that was something that started coming to the fore more maybe in 2015. I know it doesn't sound like a lot of time, but it was enough time for me to be established in a different framework. Yeah. And also because I started working out of a dungeon, and that was my first taste of what fetish and BDSM was. That was more of an in-person, real-time slant on my learning, my introduction to what this world is. But from basically a survival standpoint and a basic needs standpoint, over the years, I've come to be in touch with people who have taught me, whether directly or by how they are, that wealth is something that is possible, and what it can help to enable can be great, but it doesn't automatically speak to a capacity of an individual. So how did I kind of get to this point where I do feel much closer to this financial freedom, which is sort of a point where you can basically live off your investments, is how I see it. Still learning, correct me if I'm wrong. But it's been a journey. I started off in survival, getting paid for my labor, for my time. And over time, I started to think a little bit more about what money meant in the transaction of a power dynamic, whether it rendered it unreal, whether it, relegated it to fantasy. And that's been an interesting thing. Sometimes, probably quite early on in me getting slowly also into the scene, and not just as a worker, you would see these arguments from people in the lifestyle who had never been paid or paid for power dynamic, more an experience, a DS experience. And a lot of the times they would say that what I was doing, me working and getting money for what I was doing made it not real. And I think it's really not as simple as that, because now I've had experience of both sides. And I think that it really depends on a specific scenario for us to tell how much influence that one aspect, be it money in this case, has over the truth of a dynamic. I think that there can be many hidden agendas and motivations in a dynamic that didn't start out or has seemingly anything to do with money. So maybe a lifestyle scenario that can also render it inauthentic. So I don't think it's as simple as, oh, you are working, therefore it is not real. I think that within any exchange, there can be elements of reality or fantasy, and what can also come out of fantasy can be something very real and applicable for somebody. So everything is fucking murky. is the byline of this whole podcast. I refuse to give any definitive answers. Yeah. So what has being a dominatrix taught me about money? We start off in the survival. We meet some basic needs. We start to think about the transactional nature of a service experience and whether that negates actual power exchange. Maybe a parallel can be drawn from, say, we're in a caring relationship with a nurse, and does the nurse actually care? Is this expression of care and this focus and attention of care, is that negated by the professional transaction? Are there things that cannot be taken from it? Or can they? You know, it's like we can still take away the feeling of care and it can still be very real for people. It can just be that money enabled us all to get to that point, maybe a lot faster than the dating process. To get somebody to care for free. Yeah. But aside from this understanding that it may not relegate an experience into pure fantasy and something that cannot be tangible for someone. But I think also it's been interesting to think about, okay, so me as the dominant, supposedly telling you what to do and having all of this power, and you giving me the money, does that mean that you are the one with power? Again, I don't think it's that simple. I think it really ends up depending how my as the dominant relationship is to money and how much room I have to accept the stipulations of you giving me that money. So say I really need to pay the rent and I will see whomever that's walking off the street into session because I know I need to make these numbers. And I've been in that situation before. And to be honest, I didn't feel like anything had been taken away from me because I also think I had the power of perspective and knowing that I didn't give a shit, you know, if like this wasn't necessarily somebody that I found like captivating, that I really wanted to engage with. And I've been in personal situations also where it hasn't been totally what I'm feeling that day, but because of maybe legacy of the relationship or whatever, you feel like you need to, like nothing is 100%. Everything is a compromise within ourselves. And I think that I was very good at compromising when it came to the scenarios of survival, in order for me to not feel like my power was necessarily taken away. I think I've been maybe all too good at existing within scenarios of inequality in general, where like, why did I have to hustle for, basic needs? Sometimes I talk about universal basic income on this podcast, and I maybe have a little look at it. It's one of my thoughts that I think about. But money, yeah, it's been, and so like, I know I keep going back, but I try to do things chronologically so you can stay with me and I can also go through my thought process. But starting off in like this more survival sort of relationship with money, maybe having some philosophical thoughts about the nature of things, because that's where my mind may go. And however, starting to engage with lifestylers who are denouncing my ability to have any power because they see money as the negating element, and me then and now, like, understanding that it's far more complex than that. But then over time, moving out of the dungeon context into independent work and having more freedom around my rates and my business model, or like a more ability for innovation, and starting to understand that I could charge more, and looking into markets like that, and then having access to people who could pay those kinds of rates. And I sort of had a brief period of time in my schooling where I was around some families with a lot of wealth, but I didn't really necessarily I don't come from that, but I also didn't necessarily grow up with it as a constant understanding of the world. And so even though I knew that that was something that existed, it wasn't my norm. But in this job and charging higher rates, it means that it's people who have more disposable income, right? And you start to meet people who have that access to wealth as opposed to seeing money as a survival mechanism. And you start to realize the structures that help them accrue that, as opposed to it being off of an individual's back necessarily. So that's also been an interesting learning for me, that a lot of the times wealth is accrued because of structural means and not an individual's ability. So yeah, unfairness has been something that the job and access to clients of that wealth status has taught me also, that the world is very, very unfair. Yeah, quite naturally. Yeah, so I mean, this is about this little mini series is about power, right? So let's try to stick to it. We see money as power because it has ability behind it. Ability to bring a roof over our heads, ability to influence when it's enough differentiator between one wealth set and another, ability to move governments, and yeah. So if you're watching the video, you're seeing my eyes go in all sorts of directions and my expression feel a little distraught sometimes. But yeah, it's been an interesting ride. I wonder if I would have learned these things with such emotion if I hadn't done this job, actually, because this job is so much about a personal interaction. And a lot of what I have learned, yes, has been about my readings and things that people have taught me verbally or otherwise. But there's just maybe a lot of emotion coming across my face now, because I've had to experience a lot of people who are not bringing anything valuable to others, who have access to power through money in ways that are completely inaccessible to most people. And it's, yeah, that's where I'm at with that. Look at my face. So, what has this job taught me about money? Man, that yes, it does equate to the ability to have power, and that placement is not fairly placed, and that I'm trying to do my best with it. In that I understand what I need, and anything past that, I always try to feed back into things that are going to benefit us more widely. I focus on sex worker organizations personally. But yeah. And then there's been some interesting learnings about whether it actually means that now we have, because people are funding an experience of power dynamics, there's that learning around whether it has actually taken away the fact that any meaning behind it. I think I've also spoken about how I don't see the clear reality of that either. Yeah, again, the byline. No definitive answers. Is that frustrating? Yeah, I don't think it's frustrating for me, but I get to exist in this little bit of perhaps a little bit more of a vacuum where I understand that the black and white is maybe not as nicely black and white as I would like, that I grew up to feel reassured by. But how I see where I am now compared to where I was is far more educated about how money is placed in the world and what it can achieve, about how I can place it so that it aligns with what I value. Yeah, it's been an interesting slog. And also, maybe this needs to go off in a more personal story-based tangent. I think it's been a good sort of touching on the points to do with power, but I got some stories. I got some stories about the times that people with wealth have tried to dangle properties in front of me and negotiate their ways into my heart, and the ways that people have tried to use wealth in order to gain emotional manipulation. And I don't know, it's just like, it's ongoing. It's ongoing because I don't feel 100% like I have what I need for the rest of my life and the people around me. Yet, I wonder if I'll check out though when that point is reached. I'm not sure. Yeah. Yeah, it's a facet of how we all are interacting with the world through survival or otherwise. And perhaps it's something that is inescapable. And again, it's like about the conversations that we have around it. But let's for a moment think about if I were not me, constantly leaving room for the what ifs and maybes, if I needed to have an answer about what this job has taught me about money, like a really nice, strong, clear thing. Oh, that if it wasn't money, it would be another determining factor that people would use to fuel their dominance over others and to protect their perceived vulnerabilities. I think that there's a lot of terrified people out there, whether they understand it as fear or not, and they use greed to prop them away from that inner existential anguish as to the meaning of their potentially pitiful existences. Yeah, so I think that's what some clients have taught me. But not necessarily the individuals only themselves, but it's like the taste that they've given me of the patterns and that you can then spot in a lot of people in positions of power after that. It's almost as if it's the weak who gravitate towards it. And I guess that makes sense. But it also is kind of counterintuitive to us moving somewhere, because it kind of is a necessity in order to move somewhere. Yeah. As usual, I start an episode thinking, oh yeah, I have maybe a few of these little points that I could sort of touch on in terms of learnings, in terms of maybe some little revelations, and then it turns into me like gasping for air. Realizing the heaviness of something that maybe I chose to just have a chat about. But yeah, I think this was a little bit of an experiment for me, this mini series. I kind of wanted to test out a format, and I kind of like it. But yeah, maybe let me know what you think. Whether there's some things that have been revealed enough, or whether there would have been another way to receive that information, or whether you've heard this already in another story of mine, perhaps. But as usual, just thank you for being here and along for the ride. And I do kind of feel like there's some things that I said that were more succinct in these last 3 episodes and to the point that I do usually hide within stories. So perhaps it's good to switch it up and get to the point every now and then, right? Yeah. This is all an experiment, but I'm very happy that you're here for it. And I really appreciate how far my words seem to go and my thoughts, and that they seem to inspire your own, which is very important to me. The power. The power of information. Yeah. Another episode. Perhaps for another time, but for now, we will go back to regular programming. And it might be an interview in the next week. So thank you for listening to my random musings on what power is, about why a dominatrix exists because of the power structures that be, and how money influences my job and power dynamics, and where I see it positioned as a result of the things that I've been exposed to in my job. So yeah, I think we did get to some good things. Yeah. So thank you for listening, and speak to you with somebody else again next time.